Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Target Smart podcast. I'm your host, Albert Morales. This podcast is all about lifting up the partners we work with across the country. In the coming weeks and months, you will be hearing from members of the Target Smart team, candidates, campaign managers, and party leaders, all of them eager to share how their respective campaigns are going. In that time, do not hesitate to send us your questions, feedback, and ideas for our upcoming episodes or anything related to data, such as voter registration trends, polling trends, or anything we're seeing in the field. Perhaps there's a guest you would like us to bring on the show. Please remember to subscribe to the Target Smart podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us on YouTube. You can email the show at thetargetsmartpodcast@targetsmart.com. That's the Target Smart Podcast at targetsmart.com. We recently sat down with our next guest, Ben Lazarus. He is the principal pollster and director of research solutions. Ben joined Target Smart after serving as political director at the Atlas Project and as a senior analyst and vice president at Myers Research, a Democratic public opinion research firm. Ben specializes in state battles and has served as a pollster and senior campaign advisor to a litany of Democratic state legislative caucus operations across the country, as well as various national and state-based progressive organizations, labor unions, local Democratic parties, and candidates, and independent expenditures at every level of the ballot. He was recognized by his peers as a member of the American Association of Political Consultants 40 Under 40 class of 2022. Ben lives in Richmond, Virginia, with his wife, Jessica, and beautiful daughter, Lucy. Without further ado, Ben Lazarus. Welcome, Ben. Can you walk us through the early part of your career and what led you to become a pollster?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Albert. Hi, Albert. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for having me on the pod today. Excited to be here. What led me to polling? Well, I did some work in college that kind of was a natural fit for polling. I always enjoyed and was interested in politics throughout high school, and in college, I was a political science major, and I minored in applied statistics as well. So that was a good kind of combination. And then I worked on some campaigns right out of college, and that, as frequently happens in the political space, one thing leads into the next thing. And I had a great opportunity coming off of some campaigns that I worked on, very early in my career to work for a polling firm, Myers Research and Strategic Services, which was a company that had worked on a campaign that I had worked on as well. So we kind of had that intermingling opportunity. And I started as a junior research analyst. This was in the 2008 election cycle. It was, I wrote a ton of memos. I set up a ton of surveys, and it was a small firm. So I was really lucky and that I had a lot of opportunities very early in my career to be exposed to client work and to be really on the front lines of what pollsters do day in and day out, to advise campaigns and help them understand the audiences that they're targeting, empathize with them, listen to them directly, and use those understandings to make better decisions with their resources. And that's fundamentally what a pollster does. Helps campaigns and the causes that they're working for understand human beings and meet them where they are so that they communicate with them effectively. And, hopefully on the margins, affect some change among them, change their behavior, get them to vote for your candidate, get them to turn out to vote at all. So, that's just a kind of quick history.
Yeah, sounds like you had a pretty strong foundation there. So, Tom Bonnier and I talked a little bit about the polling misses plaguing the industry these days. You're a pollster. Some of us pretend to be from time to time. And my apologies for that's Dirty Harry the Rooster. He likes to come heckle me when I'm doing this, but ignore him, and he'll eventually go away. So, what's your view on why that is, and what does a Target Smart polling team do that sets you apart from the rest of the competition? I know you're sitting on a trove of data that most pollsters don't.
Sure. Well, I think first it's important to acknowledge the challenge, right? And to not have our heads buried in the sand about the nature of it. I actually was going back and forth with Tom yesterday about some questions he had around margin of error and like what margin of error means and how we should be thinking about it. And I mean, the simple truth is that it's never been harder to contact people. And if we want to get their opinions, we need to first contact them and we need to have them agree to take a survey. And I was talking about how I did a minor in applied statistics. So I'm very far from like a mathematician or a statistician, but I have some basic understanding of how variance works and how the laws of statistics apply to kind of these modern tools. And if you're not able to draw a random sample, then you're not able to really with confidence say that the sample you have is reflective of the actual reality that's going on in the world that you're trying to estimate with a poll. And so that is the fundamental challenge that pollsters are facing right now. People just aren't taking surveys. The declining response rates that we've seen and measured in the last 10 to 20 years since I've been in this industry have just been absolutely profound. And so what we're really doing when we do a public opinion research poll is we're finding the people who are willing to take a survey, and we're using them as proxies for everyone else and making adjustments along the way that we think based on experience and based on empirical information that academics and us in the more kind of practical field of practitioners of political polling have found to work as a way to assemble something that looks like and acts like a random sample, but we all know really isn't. And so that's why it's been so volatile and so hard for pollsters to quote unquote get it right as we think about accurately predicting who's going to win and who's going to lose. And so where I come down on all of this is I actually think the who's going to win and who's going to lose of it all is some of the least important services that I provide to the campaigns that I serve. I'm much more interested in just helping you win than I am in nailing within a point or two exactly what's going to happen in a campaign. What I frequently tell folks is that the tools that we have at our disposal, they're imperfect, but even if they were perfect, the best that they can do is measure the present. They do not tell the future. And so I think trying to do a little bit of like shifting the expectations of what we can do and what we're meant to do is really important. We need to communicate to folks what these tools are all about. And I think move folks past that horse race number and into the deeper information that exists inside the poll. What are the attitudes that people are carrying with them that we can't affect? What's the poll telling us that can help us inform what we're going to do with the next minute and the next dollar that we have at our disposal in an advocacy campaign, in a branding campaign, or of course in a political campaign. And so, the data we sit on top of at TargetSmart is certainly super duper helpful in doing everything we possibly can to make those survey estimates as accurate as possible. Because we know a lot about people that beyond what they're telling us in the survey, that can help us adjust the information in a way that is sound and is replicable, but always recognize that what we're doing right now is volatile, it's difficult, and we need to, I think, caveat that for the folks who are consuming the information that we're putting out there.
Expensive.
So,
Ben, so to that end, you're coming off the heels of a major win in, I think, Maryland 3, crowded
That's
primary of what seemed like 50 candidates on the ballot. When I got there to vote on election day, I couldn't find my candidate of choice, which congratulations.
I think it was 22 candidates.
22. Yeah. And her name wasn't even at the top. So how'd you pull that off? I mean, I know a lot of things went into your work.
Sure.
Share with our audience.
Yeah. Sure. So first of all, congratulations to our client, Sarah Elfreth, who is a state senator in District 30 in the state of Maryland, who just won what was a very competitive primary for an open seat in Maryland 3. So, first of all, all credit goes to Sarah, right? Sarah is a special, unique candidate, doesn't come along very often, she was the youngest woman ever elected to the Maryland Senate when we first helped her win her state Senate election in 2018. And she's just been an absolute grinder, workhorse, just nose to the grindstone type of legislator, and I think that has credentialed her really well. And it's what set her apart from the rest of the competition. She passed something like 82 bills with bipartisan support in her in the sessions that she's been active in the legislature. 82. Yeah. So she just she just gets shit done, right? I mean, that's like, at the end of the day, that's who Sarah is. And that's what we found to be what voters were attracted to when we did some research and tried to understand, like, what about Sarah's background and her profile aligns with what voters expect out of their next member of Congress. And that is like a best use case for polling, right? Is that we don't tell candidates what to think based on what voters think. We find where what candidates have done and what they want to do aligns with the expectations of the people they aim to serve. That's what a public opinion research poll, in my opinion, is really like absolutely optimized to do. And so what we did was Sarah had a lot of accomplishments and a lot of things she could talk about in terms of all the different support she was getting in the community, the different types of legislation that she had passed, the different pieces of what her agenda would be if she were to become the next congressperson for the 3rd Congressional District in Maryland. And we kind of were able to sort through all that and find what was most attractive about her to the voters we needed to organize to get her to a winning coalition. And when you have 22 candidates running in a race, that coalition isn't quote unquote 50+1 by the moniker of this podcast, right? It's a much lower total because you're not aiming for a majority in a first past the post election like that. And so we're trying to find out, what does a winning coalition look like, right? Who do we have to assemble across the 2 major counties that took up the 3rd Congressional District? There are 3 counties technically, but almost all the vote comes out of Anne Arundel and Howard County. So like, what does Sarah roughly need to get in each of the counties to win? She represents Anne Arundel County. So maybe our polling was showing that running up the score in Anne Arundel County was really important. Well, what works with the voters in Anne Arundel County? What do they anchor into about her background and her agenda? And then like, what is the demographic profile of the coalition that needs to come together for her to win? And in this case, it was women. We knew that over 60% of the likely primary electorate was likely to be women. And speaking to the women of the 3rd District, particularly in Anne Arundel County, about like what their core priorities were and what they expect out of their next member of Congress, we were really laser focused on that. And Sarah's profile of getting stuff done, of being an effective legislator who represents her community and is focused on the things people care about. In this case, it was women's right to choose, and really being rock solid on abortion rights and expanding abortion rights and protecting abortion rights, as well as tackling gun violence. And then just the basics of making sure the economy is growing and focusing on people's pocketbooks. These were all things that were pretty straightforward, relatively intuitive, but we're able to quantify it in a poll and then make sure that it's the kind of stuff that is going to bring together that winning coalition. And it is obviously quite effective.
Yeah. So on that note, Ben, so as the chief pollster for TargetSmart, you have access to more data and better data at your fingertips than almost any other pollster in the country. I know when I was working for polling firms in my previous roles, if we could afford it, we would always opt for TargetSmart. If you were advising the Also Brooks senatorial campaign in Maryland, what would you be advising them? Here you have things like Larry Hogan had an epiphany, and now he's self-identifying as a pro-choice moderate. Something we all know is not true. So, what will your advice be to future Senator Also Brooks?
Sure. So I've had the, honor, pleasure, headache of coming up against Larry Hogan in my role as advising the Maryland Senate Democrats over the last 2 election cycles. And Larry Hogan has typically been our challenge It's been less about the candidates we're running against in each Senate district, and each targeted Senate district. It's been more about figuring out how to get around the really what is the political juggernaut of Larry Hogan. He is a singular character in that state. He's tremendously popular. He has been since I've done research there over the last 6 years. And I think that's because people see him as something different. They see him as a unique Republican who in some ways bucks his party. And also there's, I think, an interesting, unique trend of when a partisan gets elected in a state that isn't quite aligned with their party label. So in this case, Maryland's a tremendously Democratic state. A Republican getting elected there tends to just get benefit of the doubt of being different. And that's like very much the story of Larry Hogan. Is he's got this reputation of being kind of mavericky and being moderate. And the truth of the matter is he's not, right? And like there is a absolute clear public record and clear trend in the decisions he's made with the bills he's vetoed, the bills he's pushed, his general unwillingness to compromise with the Democratic majority in the state legislature. That paints a completely different picture from what those public perceptions are. And so, you know, the Alsobrooks campaign, I'm sure, is under no illusions that it's going to be easy, that turning these perceptions on their head and getting folks to think differently about Larry Hogan than they currently think is not going to be easy. But there's plenty of evidence to make that case. And so I think it's sort of, there's two pieces that I would, you know, if I was them, I'd think about addressing. You know, one is like, how do we undermine those broader perceptions that Larry Hogan is something different? He's a different type of Republican. He's moderate. What are the proof points that need to be put out there to, particularly in paid advertising, to counter that narrative? But then two is like being a governor is very different than being a United States senator. And the kind of partisan tribal nature of our elections tend to materialize more acutely in federal races than they do in state races. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for the Alsobrooks campaign as well, which is to think about how to nationalize this election in a way that makes it so Larry Hogan can't be Mr. Moderate, and then just like calling him on his BS, right? I mean, his first ad out of the gate is calling himself pro-choice, and he's, you know, he directly vetoed measures to expand abortion access and protect abortion providers in the state of Maryland. So like he's saying one thing in his ad, which is out of political expediency, and he's doing something completely different. And so I think, you know, maybe a third leg of that stool is like people think he's a bit of a different kind of politician. Well, he's not. He's cynical. He's craven. He wants to win just like all the politicians want to win. And so kind of reverting Larry Hogan back to the mean, so to speak, of a typical politician. So he's not on this pedestal for folks. I think that's another really important component of a winning strategy against him. There's plenty of good fodder against him. And I think, County Exec Alsobrooks is a great candidate to take him on and to drive that contrast. And to, in particular, you know, rally the African-American community in the state. There's a huge Black vote in Maryland. And so having an African-American candidate on the ballot is going to be super duper important to make sure that Larry Hogan's not able to overperform in a profound way among Black voters in the state, and making sure that there's a huge base of support for her in the Black community in Prince George's County, in the city of Baltimore, and across the rest of the state.
Yeah. Sounds like a career politician to me, Ben. But
yeah,
shifting gears here,
Larry Hogan, no doubt.
Yeah, shifting gears here a little bit. I tell our viewers that no one has a better view of the electorate than TargetSmart. We have roughly 80% of the market share in the voter file data space, and folks come to us for data from all corners of the country. I'm getting a ton of calls. Yesterday, I got more than I had time for, frankly. Text messages from friends and family worried about our chances in November. What are you telling the bedwetters in your life? I know we all have them, and Tom brings up an interesting point that nobody's winning because nobody's voting yet. There's some primaries that happen. We have a candidate we're working with in Delaware. I think the primary is until September. It's after the Democratic convention. Yeah. It's I get it. It's a 24-hour news cycle, but share with our viewers your sort of your take on this issue.
Sure. I mean, first of all, like I think the horse race polling at this stage in the election really doesn't mean much, and to wet the bed over it, I think, is like a waste of nice clean sheets. And so, calm down. Would be my first recommendation. There's a ton of work to do. There's a ton of time left. I was doing another podcast where one of the topics of conversation was around what the real divide is in American politics. That there's certainly a huge divide left to right, Democrat to Republican. Our politics are very tribal and polarized, without a doubt. But what I think is the more interesting divide in American politics, particularly as I'm having conversations in like quote unquote elite circles with people who are, inside the Beltway, people who work in our industry, people who are really close to politics, is that there's a massive divide among the folks who follow this stuff and the folks that don't, right? And the people who are engaged with politics and elections every day and the people who aren't. And, we do a lot of qualitative research in addition to our polling. So we're in focus groups and we're listening to people, all the time, talking about what their exposure is to elections, how they're thinking about their political leaders, how those things interact with their everyday lives. And you'd be just absolutely like baffled to the extent to which there's just the synapses aren't firing for normal human beings as it relates to public policy, as it relates to elected officials in our country. And so while the polling might give us all a bunch of agita and anxiety, the simple fact is most folks haven't plugged into this election yet, and they won't for several months. Even with the early debate that's happening in the presidential election this time around, and that could help to drive a little bit more interest a little earlier in the cycle. But really, you're looking at sometime after Labor Day, folks actually waking up and paying attention and thinking about this stuff. And particularly the voters who are lower, quote unquote, lower information, they're spending less time thinking about politics. Those tend to be the voters who decide the election, and they're really not paying attention. And so, there's plenty of time left. This campaign hasn't really even been come off the ground yet. And I'd say, the other huge component here is like, we're still running against Donald Trump, who is inarguably the most flawed candidate to ever be on the national stage. I mean, the man is under oodles and oodles of indictments. He's literally on trial. He could be convicted of literal criminal wrongdoing in the next couple weeks. And all he keeps doing is displaying more and more acts of his kind of lunacy and extremism. And I think folks have a really short attention span, a really short memory. And like when we're able to litigate a case as a movement, the Biden campaign, more broadly progressives of reminding folks about just the chaos and corruption that was rampant from 2016 to 2020. I think that there's a real path there to shifting the fundamentals of this election and making it really a choice. And then at the same time, I think I'm really buoyed by the fact that all of the issue research that I do, and I do a lot of issue research on kind of core economic policy. What do folks view as the role of government as it relates to either investing in their lives or cutting taxes for the rich? And that is like the fundamental difference between progressives, Democrats on one side, conservatives, Republicans on the other side. Republicans believe in austerity. They think we should cut taxes, cut public investment and spending on things people care about, like education and healthcare. And Democrats want to invest in those things to make people's lives better and help middle-class working folks. And so if we can bring people back to that decision point and bring things back to, away from the BS and the misinformation, we're on winning ground. Folks side with us way more than they side with Republicans on every current issue that is at play right now, whether that's corporate greed, whether that's a woman's right to choose, whether that's a human being's right to love who they love, whether that's keeping our communities safe from gun violence. All of the data I see is suggestive of 60 to 70% of American voters being on our side on all of those topics. So if we're able to cut through the BS and the misinformation, which that's not a small task, there's a ton of BS, there's a ton of misinformation out there, and it's never been harder to break through it. That being said, the truth is really on our side, right? And I think like to the extent that we're able to clarify that decision point for folks, and show just how out of step and extreme the modern Republican Party is, how chaotic and personally motivated and extreme Donald Trump is. I think we're going to be in a good spot. It's not to say that none of this is easy. None of it is easy. But it's certainly possible. And I'd always rather be us than them as it relates to, a battle of ideas, because voters just tend to be much more into our ideas than theirs.
I would always rather be us than them on any on any given day. Okay, Ben. So as we wrap up and sticking to the polling topic here, we get a lot of folks who I think would like to better understand polling, and when unfortunately for them, all they see on the cable news networks is the horse race, to your earlier point, who's up, who's down, kind of thing. But can you tell our viewers something they can look for whenever a public poll is released to help calm the nerves? What's in the methodology they should look for, the crosstabs, whatever that you look for to determine whether the poll is legit, for example? I know there's a lot of outliers out there, but just some basic 101 things that they can do for as they drink their coffee on a Sunday morning.
My first, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but my first piece of advice is don't look at the poll. Look at almost anything else, right?
But they will.
But if you got to look at the poll, if you can't help yourself, look beyond the horse race, right? Check out what other questions are being asked in the survey, and try and get a good understanding of like what the vibes are that the voters are bringing to the piece of research that you're reading, as it relates to issues, as it relates to their general feelings about the economy, about their own personal financial situation, and about whatever else the survey has tested. I think if you're really looking at how to, I don't want to say poke holes, but like be a skeptical consumer of polling information, the demographics are always tell a story, right? And it's seeing like what the general spread is between Democrats and Republicans in a survey on a self-identified basis is always really telling. Looking at the racial composition of a survey sample, the age composition of a survey sample, the gender composition of a survey sample, all of these things can help you to kind of get a sense of, is this poll done well? Is this poll generally representative of the audience that it's aiming to study? And then finally, like, how was the poll conducted? Any good poll is going to publish some notes on their methodology. That's just a standard practice in the industry. If it doesn't, that's a good reason to throw up a red flag and say, hey, I probably shouldn't trust this. If there's no notes on the methodology, that means like when it was in the field, how it was fielded, like how the respondents were found and interviewed, whether it was over the phone, with live telephone agents, over the phone with like a robot voice, or online. If it was administered online, how were the survey respondents found? Was it done with a commercial voter file matched panel, a non-voter file matched panel? Was it solicited via text message, SMS to web style survey interview? Or was it just like a convenient sample, meaning drawn from an existing panel, or like something like Google Mechanical Turk, people who are literally just paid to take surveys and do that kind of stuff. All of these different things kind of like help you understand how reliable a survey is. And just like if the folks who are doing it are really like putting the extra steps they need to put into it to make it as accurate as is possible with the current tool set.
Yeah. So finally, Ben, the anniversary of overturning Roe v. Wade looms over next month's debate. Do you think the issue will supersede the economy, or is that one of those dumb questions a reporter on the cable news would ask? Are we in uncharted territory What's your?
I mean,
yeah,
I don't think it's a dumb question. I'm not sure it's the exact right question to ask, because I think that, if I've learned anything in terms of my, just looking at the calendar and trying to back out how many years I've been doing this stuff, 16 years of polling, it's that voters are complicated and nuanced, and they're almost never bringing just a single issue to the table as they think about who they're going to bless with their vote. And I think the decision in Dobbs and the kind of political reverberations that have resulted from that have not stopped. And they continue to be tremendously motivational to women and men. And it's really kind of depends on what part of the country you live in. It depends on what, how old you are, where you are in your family decisions, how connected you are to reproductive health care in general. But it's touched almost everyone. And when I am in focus group conversations these days, still like the last couple of weeks, the raw emotion that voters bring to that conversation is profound. And it's not like anything I've ever seen before. It is this encapsulation of how government can interact with your life in such a profound and intense way that I've never seen anything like it. And it's fundamentally different from economic policy that most folks feel fundamentally withdrawn from as it relates to the decisions that folks who are elected are making and how it's impacting their bottom line. It's much harder for people to see that. This is a clear case of these people made this decision and it affected me. It affected my daughter. It affected my granddaughter. It affected my mother. It affected my family. And I think it's just wrong. And I think, we would ignore that instinct at our peril. And I don't think we will. Like, I think it's going to be a huge topic in, I think billions of dollars of advertising are going to be spent on the issue of women's right to choose and abortion access in this election. It's not the only thing, for sure. But I also do think like linking it to the pocketbook's really important. And what I've been telling candidates is it's really important for us to recognize that as Democrats, we can walk and chew gum. We don't have to make this choice to talk about economic issues or talk about protecting abortion access and expanding abortion access. We can and should do both. I'll offer one quick example, which was we did a lot of work in New Jersey last election cycle in 2023. We do a lot of work in New Jersey in general. If you're in New Jersey and you want to poll, give me a call. I'm always happy. I love working in the Garden State. But we did a lot of work in the legislative elections, and we did some work specifically in, I'll call out Legislative District 16, one of the kind of top targeted districts in the state. And what we learned, we did focus groups, we did polling. And what we learned was, New Jersey's like incredibly high property tax state. It's adjacent to the Philadelphia and New York media markets. So it's a very expensive place to live. Housing costs, fuel, food, everything's expensive in New Jersey. And people on top of that are getting, $20,000, $30,000 property tax bills. And so folks were pressed around affordability, all kinds of affordability issues. And that's what they tell you in a poll is their top issue. It's always taxes. And they're concerned about being able to afford to live in the state. And people talk about how they're in the sandwich generation and they can't afford to both send their kids to have childcare for their kids and take care of aging parents. And I'm thinking about moving to North Carolina, South Carolina. We hear that refrain all the time in focus groups in New Jersey. And so we had to be really cognizant of that. But then at the same time, we learned in our research that by framing Republicans as extreme and reminding the voters that Republicans are the ones who are pushing limits on a woman's right to choose, even in a state like New Jersey, where abortion access is relatively protected, compared to many states across the country. We were able to break through with folks, and they recognized what the consequences of Republican leadership and Republican governance are. And so we found that, like, in our communications, we had to speak to affordability. We couldn't ignore it. We couldn't put our head in the sand and say, we're just going to talk about abortion. That would have been, it would have been almost rude to the voter to do that, right? It would have been completely dismissive of their core concerns. So we had to speak to the things that we had done to provide tax relief and to make prescription drugs more affordable and to do everything we could to make food and gas more affordable and bring down the cost of housing for folks. And that we hear you, we empathize with you, we're working on it. We recognize we can't change it overnight, but we're doing our best. And so we had to acknowledge that, but then quickly move the conversation to a place that was more winning territory for us. Center the conversation and the choice around a woman's right to choose and around the extremism that was the Republicans who had indicated that if they were to gain control of the legislature, they were going to push a ban on abortion in the state, and move the conversation and move the decision point to that. And we did that really effectively. And I think that was the story of the 2022 midterms as well, where we were, again, able to walk and chew gum, talk about inflation, talk about bringing down costs, speak to people's core concerns as it relates to their pocketbook, and then drive the decision point around Republican extremism in a post-Dobbs world. And I can't see that not being a critical winning formula for us in 2024 as well.
Yeah, I guess what makes it so frustrating for me is, looking back to 2018, we really haven't lost a meaningful race. I mean, we've been running the table on special elections, and we really haven't lost anything. We lost a few, but those were, amateur mistakes we were making, I think, in some of those campaigns. But anyway, be that as it may, I worked for Martin Frost, the dean of the Texas delegation many moons ago. I won't date myself, but he would always tell us, run as though, I know we're winning by 70 points or whatever, but let's always act as though we're trailing by, that amount. And I think in a way, this might even help us, to put the fire in the, of our candidates and our teams on the ground. Ben, you've been a great guest. I think our viewers learned a lot about polling and how Target Smart can help them or their candidate or cause get across the finish line. You want to tell them where they can find you, sharing your email and your home address?
Yeah, sure. I'm not on the socials in a super big way, but you can find me on Twitter or X at Ben _D_Lazarus, LAZARUS. If you'd like to reach me to talk about a project or to learn more about our services, you can reach me at ben.lazarus@targetsmart.com, or by emailing the podcast at the address that Albert talked about earlier.